Okay. Well, I just want to say thanks to all of you for coming this evening. We're going to be talking for the next 45 minutes or so about this book, Joyful Wisdom by Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche. And we've talked with some of the folks on the call this evening, and they've shared that they have some experience with Dharma, but they also have met and heard of his Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, and he's one of their teachers. And so I'm just really happy to be able to share some thoughts about the book. And I'm thinking that all books, the purpose of all books is to get us to talk. Yes, we have to read. And yes, it's very interesting to read. But I was talking to another Dharma student earlier this evening who said, oh yeah, I just did reading for like years and years. And he said, I'm ready to start talking now. And I just thought that was, what a refreshing perspective, right? He said he got involved in Dharma when he was a young college student 20 years ago when he was a young college student. And now he said, I am having a midlife crisis, and I've decided I want it to be a Buddhist midlife crisis. So after having studied Buddhism for about 20 years, he says, I'm ready to come back and start meditating again. And it was just such a another refreshing phone call from somebody who is just really interested in putting Dharma to work in their life. And I know that as we were talking before the recording started, one of the folks here shared that she was really interested in finding ways to apply Dharma in her everyday life. Well, this book will help with that. Because I'm going to, do I have the power to share a screen with you folks, or? Oh, I do. You guys are amazing. Okay, you've got like all the things going on here. Oh, you know what? I can't do it just now because I have to. Oh yeah, there it is. All right. Yeah, there we go. So you'll be able to see my Kindle copy of this book, which is not like my paper copy of this book, which has writing in it. Anyhow, but in any case, I really like the pragmatic approach of this book, talking about first of all the principles and the experience of them, and then the application of these in your own life. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a discussion of chapter 1 and chapter 2. I think that might be a little bit of a good place to begin. So to start with, since I think the group has have you guys already done a little bit of sitting meditation before I showed up on the scene, or were you just discussing?
No, we didn't get an opportunity to.
Okay, well then that's going to be the first thing we do. The first thing we'll do is just sit for a few minutes or a few moments, because I think that it always helps when we have a discussion, if we start with a little bit of sitting. And I want to thank once again the Santa Monica Karma Thegsum Chöling Tibetan Buddhist Center for hosting this Zoom stream to discuss this book. We'll be meeting monthly to discuss the book, and there was no reading assignment for the first meeting. So I'm just going to give a little view about the first couple of chapters, but then next time when we get together, we'll talk about the chapters following that. Okay, so the practice of sitting is, you can practice whatever of the silent sitting techniques you have. Because we are short on time, I'll just let people know who, I think everybody here already has learned the practice of silent sitting. If you've learned Vipassana, you can do that. If you've learned Shamatha, you can do that. If you've learned open awareness, you can do that. But if none of those sound familiar to you, You can merely sit and rest your mind in the present moment of awareness and think that you are dedicating this session to all suffering beings. And so we'll just sit quietly for just a moment. All right. Thank you very much for sitting with us for just a little bit. Thanks for that. From the point of view of the teachings of the Buddha, it's said that it's good to bring a good intention into everything you do. And so we'll start with the thought that there are lots of beings suffering in the world today. And we will dedicate this time that we're going to spend together to helping ourselves understand more about ourselves and more about others, and also to bring more stability and quiet to our minds for the benefit of all beings. So the formal practice is to take refuge in the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the path, and the Sangha as the community. So you can think that you have taken refuge, and in this way, you're bringing all kinds of goodness to our gathering tonight. Once again, the book we're looking at is Joyful Wisdom by Mingyur Rinpoche. I think that when we look at the table of contents, the first chapter, or the introduction, is where he talks a little bit about his own struggles with anxiety and the difficulties of growing up, but that he was helped by his father, who was a great meditation master. And then he decides that he wants to share a little bit about what he has learned about himself and about the practice of meditation in the book. So the first chapter of the book is called Light in the Tunnel. And I think that's it's kind of lovely that he starts with his experience as a test subject in the lab. He was among the meditators who was being studied at the University of Wisconsin at the Madison campus, where he was being put into a functional, or fMRI chamber, a functional magnetic resonance imaging scanner, in order to see what's going on with his brain. And he told some of the amusing situations that he got into as he was being put into a very uncomfortable place and asked to meditate while he was in this very uncomfortable place. And he talked about the similarities of this experience of being uncomfortable and meditating with the life of a meditator in this world. And so that's a little bit about how he begins his book journey here, sharing joyful wisdom. And what's so really interesting about this is that I also visited the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and I also spent time in the functional MRI chambers there as they were looking at my brain. This would have been about 2007. And I got a chance to meet Antoine Lutz, but I did not get a chance to meet the grand old man, Richie Davidson. But we did a lot of work together, and I was introduced in Madison to a young researcher named Julie Brefsinski Lewis, who is now a pal of mine. She's a student of Trolek Rinpoche, the late Trolek Rinpoche, and she was studying compassion, meditation, and the brain. And so for the last 3 years, Dr. Julie has been coming from the University of West Virginia to Columbus, Ohio, to give talks during the annual Science Center Science Festival every May. So this coming year will be her 4th year presenting on meditation and the brain. And so it's really some of the friendships you make as you are I tell people, oh yes, I met Dr. Julie. I was Dr. Julie's lab specimen, and it makes everybody laugh. So in any case, what I remember most about my experience was the fact that even if the functional MRI is using these magnets that move very quickly in order to make images of your brain, I got out of the experience that magnetism does affect your brain. I did get quite dizzy after spending all that time being bombarded by magnets. It was really unusual, and it was really fun. The same experience that Mingyur Rinpoche talks about, being put into this very unusual position and looking at your mind. It was a very unusual experience. So in any case, he uses the image of the light in the tunnel to talk about this experience that he had, literally being in a tunnel of the fMRI chamber. And as we all do when we are in this world that sometimes seems so dark, that there is a light in the midst of that. And there was a specific page here that I was looking at earlier that let's see if I can find it. Yeah, there we go. He talked a little bit about the experience we have in the world of sometimes. Let's see, it's the previous page to this. Okay, good. He says the finding that the part of the brain that's associated with maternal love can be triggered by the work of meditation, and he said this finding captures in a nutshell one of the main benefits of Buddhist meditation practice: the opportunity to use difficult conditions and the disturbing emotions that usually accompany them to unlock the power and potential of the human mind. So, but the other part was this: many people never discover this transformative capacity or the breadth of inner freedom it allows. Simply coping with the internal and external challenges that present themselves on a daily basis leaves little time for reflection, for taking what might be called a mental step backward, mental step back, to evaluate our habitual responses to day-to-day events and to consider that perhaps there may be other options. And I want you to make a note of this phrase, mental step back, because I'm going to return to it in a few minutes. as being one of the great skills that comes to us from the practice of meditation, the capacity to step back. But Mingyur Rinpoche goes on to explain that because people are enmeshed in so many experiences in everyday life, that sometimes they come away with this, he called it a deadening sense of inevitability. This is the way I am. This is the way life works. There's nothing I can do to change. And this hopelessness is a part of what we're seeing experts point to as being the cause for so much pain and suffering in our modern life. Even though we have a great deal of wealth, the wealth is not distributed properly. And so there's a lot of pain as people struggle to survive. But there's also a lot of pain that is mental pain, where people, even though they have wealth and goodness, they can't make use of their mind in a proper way. So, for example, he was talking here in this part of the first chapter. He says, I gradually came to realize that the time and effort people spend on accumulating and maintaining material or outer wealth affords very little opportunity to cultivate the inner wealth, qualities such as compassion, patience, generosity, and equanimity. And he said that this imbalance leaves people particularly vulnerable when facing serious issues like divorce, illness, and chronic physical or emotional pain. And so he says that he's met a lot of people who have been attracted to Buddhism because they read or heard somewhere that it offers a novel method of overcoming pain and attaining a measure of peace and well-being. And he says that it can be very surprising to these people that these very, very ancient traditions still have relevance in our modern life. And I'm reminded, and several of you on the call tonight will be reminded of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, who came to the United States in the 1970s and began teaching here. And he would often begin his talks by saying, there's a lot of wealth in this country, but there's something that you're lacking. You are lacking purpose. You're lacking a connection to your inner wealth. And so he was very compassionate with us, but did let us know that that because of our connections from previous lifetimes, we were now being brought together again to study the teachings of the Buddha. And he said, your inner wisdom brought you here. So why don't you stay and learn what you can learn from the teachings of the Buddha? He said that he compared the Buddha's teachings to water. He said, water has satisfied the thirst of sentient beings for a millennia. He said, and in just the same way, the truths and the understandings that the Buddha Shakyamuni reached in his enlightenment experience continue to be just as useful now as they were 2,500 years ago. So I myself never tired of hearing him say that just like water, the Buddha's teachings can fulfill us because they deal with what is within us, what is inside us. And then I'd like to continue, if I may, for another 5 minutes or so before stopping for discussion, to talk a little bit about this second topic of running in place, the sensation that he had as a child of being very anxious, being a very anxious child, and suffering from mood swings, and then trying to practice and finding that he really struggled to practice meditation. And he was very embarrassed to say to his father, who was a great meditation master, that he was very embarrassed, to say to him, well, I just don't think I've got the skill, And he said, I'm forever grateful for the kind way my father responded to my confession that I was so hopelessly caught up by distractions that I couldn't follow even the simplest meditation instructions, like focusing on a visual object. First, he told me not to worry. Distractions were normal, especially in the beginning. When people first start to meditate, all sorts of things pop up in their mind. And he used the example of twigs carried along by a rushing river. The twigs might be physical sensations, emotions, memories, plans, even thoughts like, I can't meditate. So it was only natural to be carried away by these and caught up, because we have never learned a method for working with these thoughts and feelings at the moment. So I thought that was a really wonderful idea, that where he was talking about the difficulties of trying to be perfect at meditation, only to find that his lack of perfection was actually the raw material of what would make him a good meditator. And the next section, he talked about making friends with one's mind. And he explains the meaning of the Tibetan word gom, which means to become familiar with. And that's the word that's used to describe the practice of meditation, is that it's like getting to know ourselves. And then he says, meditation, getting to know your mind is like that in the beginning of, an introduction to a stranger. And many people have told me when they learned the basic techniques of calm abiding or shamatha meditation, whether they use a visual object as their anchor, a sound as their anchor, or the coming and going of the breath, whatever anchor they use, they will say, very invariably, they'll say, oh my gosh, I didn't know I was thinking that much. And what I've heard teachers say is, well, you're very fortunate in that now you have arrived at the first stage of shamatha meditation, where you are noticing your thoughts and you're seeing your thoughts are rushing like a waterfall down the side of a hill, because we are actually becoming aware of something that we were never aware of before, which is the individual thoughts. One of my dear friends, Bradley Butters, was a meditation instructor at Columbus, Ohio KTC Center. He used the example of sitting in your car watching a train go by. He said, when the train first begins to go by, it's going so quickly you can't see the spaces between the cars. But as the train slows down, he said, you can see individual spaces in between the individual cars. And he said, this is what it's like to be a meditator, and that you begin to see your thoughts and see how your thoughts influence what you are experiencing day by day. It was the Buddha's teaching that we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. This was the quotation of the very first verses shared in the book of the Buddha's sayings, the Dhammapada. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. And so Mingyur Rinpoche talks a little bit about the sort of rushing that we go through in our everyday life, and that because we're so rushed and because we don't have an examined mind, he said, our attention can fix on the most intense aspect of whatever we're experiencing: physical pain, fear of being late, the embarrassment of failing an exam, the grief of losing a friend. He said, in general, our minds spin in one of two directions when faced with such situations. We try to escape or we become overwhelmed. Our experience appears to us as an enemy, or by completely taking over our thoughts and manipulating our reactions, we think it's a boss, it's bossing us around. He said, even if we do manage to temporarily escape whatever's bothering us, turning on TV, reading a book, surfing the internet, the problem just goes underground for a while, secretly gaining more power because now it has become mixed with the fear of facing it again later on. And I'm working on a talk that I'm going to be giving for KTD Monastery this weekend. And I borrowed for this talk, I borrowed a statement from my dad, who was an old 12-step recovery person. And he said, when you have a problem, he said, sometimes you fixate on your problem and it becomes so big that you feel you can't overcome it. And he said, and you end up living in the problem rather than living in the answer. And I feel like this is such a powerful statement because this is what Mingyur Rinpoche is pointing to here. We get so overwhelmed by the power of something that we fail to see what's going on inside of it. And so this is when Mingyur Rinpoche says, my father's advice to me when I told him the trouble I was having practicing meditation offered a middle way between the two extremes of running away and feeling overwhelmed. I could welcome those thoughts as friends. Hello, fear. And then, of course, because he was talking about a physical sensation, hello, itch. How are you? Why don't you stick around so we can get to know each other? And that's when he starts talking about mindfulness. A rough translation of the Tibetan term drenpa, which means to become conscious, okay? So he says what we're becoming conscious of are all the subtle processes of body and mind that ordinarily escape our notice because we're looking at the big picture. You know, we're watching the train go by. We're not seeing the individual cars. And he says adopting a mindful approach gradually breaks down the big picture into smaller, more manageable pieces. And that's that to me is the key bit. And so one of the things that he talks about was how the things that used to make him afraid became less and less powerful. And so I'm going to stop here for a second and say that anybody who's practiced meditation knows how this works. You're sitting and you're watching the breath as it comes in, you're watching the breath as it goes out, or you're being aware of your awareness in the present moment, or you're being aware of a sound, or you're being aware of a visual object. And what you notice when you first start practicing is that you're able to have a short period of attention to that object. And that short period of attention is then followed by a period of mental wandering. And that the technique for working with wandering is to notice that you've wandered. You can even label it thinking, or however you like to think about it. You consciously let it go and consciously usher your attention gently, with kindness, gently usher your attention back to the technique, and think of that return as a fresh start. So what you notice with this is that the thought that you were having at that moment, that you noticed and that you labeled and that you let go, that thought actually did not return. It disappeared. And what's so interesting about that moment, my teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, said, it's like cutting down a single stalk of bamboo in a bamboo forest and holding it up and noticing that it's hollow inside. He said, now you don't have to cut down all the rest of the stalks in the bamboo forest because you know they're all like that. And he said, it's that way with your thoughts. When you see that one of them is empty and of solidity and solidness, he said, you can then begin to infer that that is how all of them are. And he says, and in that way, thoughts begin to lose their power. When you let go of that big, ugly, hairy thought that has been bothering you, the minute that you are able to let go of that big, ugly, hairy thought that had been giving you trouble and see what it really is, there's this moment where you realize that all of your habits are made of those thoughts. And that by letting go of one thought, you're letting go of a chain of thoughts that then leads to habitual thinking, habitual patterns, and so on. And even though when we're not meditating, we sometimes forget this, there will be moments. And I use the example of your cell phone is ringing, and I don't have my cell phone with me. I actually left it in the other room. So you're talking with someone, and then your cell phone rings, and for a moment you are torn between the person you're talking to and your cell phone. And then even if you're in a big fight with somebody and you finally decide to answer the phone, you go, "Oh, hi, Mom, how are you?" And then you see it's illustrated momentarily that you became a different person. You were first pointing to that person saying, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong." And then suddenly somebody you care about calls you and you're like, "Oh, hi." And it's like you let go of that thought in just that moment. And you did it accidentally, but you did it on purpose. And so this idea that thoughts are discontinuous, thoughts can be discontinued, and they actually are the building blocks of our experience. And then we can begin to say, wait a minute, maybe my experience in this world is workable. Wow, do you think I could make some changes? And that's, to me, the power of the practice of meditation, is being able to take what Mingyur Rinpoche calls that one step back. Take that one step back and look at it as though from the outside and see what it is, rather than living inside that thought, living inside that problem. You begin to live in what the answer is, which is to see it as though from outside. So anyway, that was something that just struck me so much from this first chapter, where he talks about the practice of mindfulness, and how the practice of mindfulness is helped by Drenpa, which he said which is to become conscious, and also by Sheishin, which is alertness. And so I suppose I could go on, but we don't have that much time together. So you'll be able, you'll have to read a little bit more about this. But I guess there's one more thing I want to share. And he gives a story about visiting Sherabling Monastery in India, which is a place I've also visited. And so again, it was delightful, It was delightful to read about about his experience there. I must say that my one memory of Sherabling is that it's like one of my happy places on earth, because it's so pleasant there, and it's so beautiful, and the mountains are amazing, and having Situ Rinpoche nearby is amazing. But getting there is a little scary because some of the roads are this wide, and there is no guardrail, and you can look out the side of the bus and go, Anyway, so it's a great moment to practice mindfulness. I'm going to share one more excerpt from the book, and then we'll stop. Because we, there's so many fabulous examples in this book. Here we go. Antidotes and bodyguards. Let's see here. I'm sorry to bypass the story. It's really it's a lovely story. There's something here. He was talking about having the discomfort of water in his ear. And he told one of his teachers, I told him that, that he had tried everything to get this water out of his ear. And he advised me to pour more water in my ear and then tip my head to let it all drain out. To my surprise, it worked. And then he explained this was an example of a principle taught long ago by the Buddha of using the problem as an antidote. He said, timidly, I asked if the same approach could be used to deal with thoughts and feelings. He looked at me quizzically, and I found myself pouring out how anxious I had been most of my life. And he said, Tibet is full of long and lonely roads. So he told a story. Traveling is always dangerous because there's bandits and so forth. And then he said, sometimes people try to protect themselves by hiring bodyguards, but that doesn't work either. And he said, he said, well, why not? And the teacher laughed. The bandits are always more fierce, and they always have better weapons. And so then he said, the clever travelers, when attacked by bandits, make a deal with them. Why don't we hire you to be our bodyguards? We can pay you something now and more when we reach the end of our journey. That way there won't be any more fighting. No one will get hurt, and you'll get more from us than you would by simply robbing us on the trail. Less danger for you because no one will come hunting for you, and less danger for us because you're stronger and you have better weapons than any bodyguards we could hire. And then he says, your mind, the teacher gives the example, your mind is the long and lonely road. And the problems you described are the bandits. Knowing that you're there, you're afraid to travel, or you use mindfulness like a hired bodyguard, mixing it with hope and fear, thinking, if I watch my thoughts, they will disappear. He says a third choice is to be like a clever traveler and invite your problems to come with you. When you're afraid, don't try to fight the fear or run from it. Make a deal with it. Hey, fear, stick around. Be my bodyguard. Show me how big and strong you are. If you do that often enough, he said, eventually fear becomes just another part of your experience, something that comes and goes. You become comfortable with it. You maybe even rely on it. He's to appreciate the power of your mind. Your mind must be very powerful to produce such big problems. He said, when you no longer resist a powerful emotion, you are free to channel the energy in a more constructive direction. When you hire your problems as bodyguards, they show you how powerful your mind is. And so he continues to talk a little bit about his lessons and the things that he learned from the difficult things that happened in his life. And but again, because of time being short tonight, we don't have time to get to all of the points that he's making. But what he's getting at here is that when he was able to look at a problem head on and shift his perspective, even take that one step backwards and see the problem as it is, he said he realized that he began to see the anxiety itself. He said, in that moment, it hit me that the light I was looking for was the tunnel, and that the tunnel I felt trapped in was the light. The only difference between them was my perspective, the way I chose to look at the situation. So in any case, he said, my early training and the experiences that followed have shown me that what may at first appear as darkness is in essence nothing more substantial than a shadow cast by the mind's true light. And that's, I think, a hint of what's to come, because he's talking about how the mind, eventually he does talk about the wisdom that resides within the mind, the natural wisdom that resides within the mind, that we can begin to discover and work with when we practice shamatha or mindfulness meditation. There are lots of examples in the book of times when he was able to use a problem as a solution, but I'm guessing that all of you have those types of experiences in your own life. So I'll have to stop here. I'm sorry, I talked a lot, but if we could take about, if we could run over by about 5 minutes, I'll watch the time. And we could spend the next 10 minutes. You can either share a story or ask a question or any type of response. So thanks. And if there is no response, then we'll sit. Yes, please.
Lama Kathy, I was intrigued. I've heard you refer in the past to your having been measured with your brain, but I didn't realize it was up at University of Wisconsin. And while describing it tonight, you mentioned, I think, possibly the word dizzy.
Yeah.
So please tell us a little bit more about your experiences and what you walked away with that.
Yeah, I didn't find out until later that probably what I was suffering from was not the magnets themselves, but dehydration from spending so much time away from my friend water. And so I think also that that different people's bodies respond differently to these techniques and the imaging techniques and things like this. And so I actually did feel an impact from being under that much magnetism, and it did fade over time. It had nothing to do with meditation. It just had something to do with sort of the way my body and mind are tuned. Like Mingyur Rinpoche, I'm an anxious person. And so I actually oddly did not feel a lot of anxiety going into the MRI, because it's just kind of what was there. I mean, it's hard to explain, but it's kind of like, well, this is what's happening now, and this is what I'm doing.
How long were you in it?
I don't remember, but I do remember that some of them were quite long. Some of the sessions were quite long. I want to say they were 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and there were several of them in a day. The experience was much better in Wisconsin because the equipment was newer. At Princeton, when I was studied at Princeton, I really felt like very dizzy and so forth. That was Brent Field. The researcher was Brent Field. He's a Theravada Vipassana practitioner. and a fantastic researcher, and we had a lot of fun doing all the different experiments and so on. But I never did, by the way, find out any of the findings from my tests or my how my data was used. But it was so nice to know that I was part of a group of people that were trying to help people understand the benefits of meditation. So I'm sorry I can't give you any fun stories.
Which was the first, Princeton or
Princeton was
Wisconsin?
first. Princeton was first, yeah.
And what year?
This would have been 2007, I believe. All I know is that somebody from Columbia traveled over to Princeton to do a second test on me that was somewhat similar to the one that Mingyur Rinpoche described, where loud sounds were played to you that were distressing. So yeah, it was interesting. I was glad to do it. I was actually very glad to do it. So, but thanks for asking.
I've had a couple of MRIs only just for my own body, for arthritis. But at the end, I will tell whoever has administered those that in Tibet, they tell someone who is dying to go towards the loud sounds. And I 2 out of 3 times, the people hearing this were thrilled that this could be used as training towards, and I consequently I've looked forward to any MRIs because if for those who have had them, the sounds that they throw at you. Now these are very brief sessions, maybe 10 minutes, but not what you've compared. But
yeah,
I found them quite enjoyable.
I have to thank you for sharing that. I really want to thank you for sharing that because I think everybody can learn something from that, from what you just said. I remember people who travel a lot know, oh, this airport has this thing, this airport has this thing, and so forth. And so those of you who've traveled to Detroit know that the Detroit Metro Airport, like the Chicago O'Hare Airport, has underground tunnels that have like colors and lights and sounds. And I told Lama Karmadrodol, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's nephew, I said, oh, it was really great. I just let it all come in. And he said, oh yeah, he says, great Bardo training. Great Bardo training. Yeah, absolutely. So what you're saying about that also matches with something that Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, who as some of you folks may have met or seen before his retirement. He retired somewhere around 2007, actually. Before he retired from teaching, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso would often talk about the fact that you can experience the magic of the mind by taking a plane flight. He said, you start in one place and you get off the plane and you're magically somewhere else. How amazing. And he would often quote the Milarepa song that goes, Ema, the phenomena of the 3 realms of samsara, while not existing, they appear. How incredibly amazing. And so Khenpo Tsultrim encouraged us that when we were hearing loud sounds and seeing bright lights, that we should just look at the mind in that moment. And so I just thought that was just a really, so thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have about 5 more minutes. Yes, please, Stephen.
Yeah, could I take maybe 90 seconds to take us back to the 90s? I think, remember Waco, Texas, and that so-called cult with David Koresh. And a lot of us were, of course, very saddened by the event and false flag operation or whatever it was. But also we were amused that the FBI, I think it was, that was bombarding the compound with sound with this huge speakers. It was revealed that they were using tantric Kyoto monks chanting.
Oh, dear me.
And I find that so ironic because, of course, David Koresh and others were either killed or suicide or whatever shortly thereafter. But At least that they had that favor done to them.
I'm both astonished to hear that, and like you, there's a little bit of awe, at least they heard that, at least they got to hear some Dharma. Yeah. Oh, that's so sad. Yeah. And really, what a tragedy. What an absolute tragedy. But thank you for sharing, because it's, yeah, thank you. Others, we have time for maybe one more comment. Yes. Barbara. I'm sorry, you will have to unmute, Barbara. Yeah. It's okay. It's okay. We got time.
Thank you. I had, when I lived in California 3 or 4 years ago, I volunteered with the VA, and part of the volunteer stuff was I had an MRI. And so I was oriented to what was going to happen, etc. And I just did shamatha. I counted my breaths from 1 to 10 over and over again. And all of a sudden, the fellow, the technician or whomever came in and said, okay, it's all over.
Ah.
It seemed to go very quickly, very easily, because I was counting my breaths and trying to do shamatha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, Barbara. Yeah, I know. It's like there's just so many experiences that we can have in a different way because of meditation. Well, because of time, I did promise that I would have you finished at 35 minutes past the hour, because I know that folks are probably, let's see, what time is it for you? Oh, it's probably in getting toward evening there. So I'm just really delighted to have had this opportunity to see you all and to talk with you all about Dharma, and also to share just a little bit about the book. And looks like it's going to take us a little while to get through it, but we may have to go for longer than 4 meetings, but we'll see. We'll see how it all goes. Just thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. And I see it says we'll stay on after I finish. Okay, very good. Well, then I'll conclude my portion with a dedication. You brought all your sincerity and goodness here tonight. Thank you so much for bringing it and creating this little Dharma community in the Zoom screen. So thank you so much. And let's dedicate the merit to all suffering beings. I'll recite the short prayer in English. Through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Thanks, folks. Fantastic to see you, and I'll see you next month.